Greetings, friends. I am Vitaly Portnikov. Drones do not disappear anywhere from the airspace of Tribute. We can say that they are increasingly being noticed over important military facilities of this country and even in neighboring countries. For example, in Germany and Norway. And all this is happening on the eve of the European Union Summit, which is to be held in Copenhagen next Wednesday. So we can talk not only about a signal for Denmark, but also about a serious warning for the entire European Union. And although no one directly accuses Russia, it is quite obvious whose warning this is. That is why Danish Foreign Minister Lars Rasmussen responded harshly to the statements of the Russian ambassador to Copenhagen, Vladimir Barman, who noted that Russia is not interested in escalating tensions in Europe. The head of the Danish Foreign Ministry, in an unusually harsh form, noted that the statement of the Russian ambassador is complete nonsense, since it is Russia that is interested in increasing tensions. But against the background of the fact that drone attacks do not stop, but are becoming more frequent, and are now connected not only with the airspace over civilian airports, but above all over military bases, which may indicate intelligence purposes. The question arises what to do in such a situation. And now everyone is trying to help Donnie. Ukraine has declared its readiness to provide Copenhagen with its specialists who would help Denmark in the detection and destruction of unknown flying objects. Sweden also noted that they are ready to provide Denmark with a Swedish drone detection system on the eve of the European Union Summit, which the two neighboring countries could use together. And now Germany is considering how to act more effectively in the case of the danger of drones, up to changes in legislation that would make it possible to destroy armies of suspicious flying objects. In short, we can say that if Russia pursued primarily the goal of sowing panic in Europe, it succeeded. Because so far, neither the explanations nor the actions of the Danish government cause much enthusiasm among the residents of this country. Many are beginning to notice that Denmark, as well as other NATO member countries, turned out to be almost unprepared for a drone attack on its airspace. That the security situation has changed, and NATO countries have been preparing for the wars of the past. While the possibility of launching drones from anywhere and anywhere on the European continent makes both military bases and nuclear facilities and other places important from the point of view of the security of citizens, up to infrastructure facilities, vulnerable. And already now, we can talk about a real change in the nature of sabotage. Remember what happened in the first years of the Great Russian-Ukrainian War. These were infrastructure disruptions and cyber attacks, but not drone flights in the airspace of European countries. And it is obvious that the Russian Federation is preparing for much larger-scale actions. This, in particular, is evidenced by the statement of the representative of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia, Maria Zakharova, who noted that Ukraine is going to conduct a drone attack in Europe under a false flag, in order to create tension between the European member countries of NATO and the Russian Federation. And Russia, of course, will have nothing to do with this attack. That's the perfect excuse for any Russian attack, including with the use of attack drones, which can cause explosions and destruction in European countries. The drones, of course, will be Russian, and the goals will also be determined by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of the Russian Federation. These can be both military and infrastructure facilities, in particular, related to assistance to the Ukrainian armed forces. And after the attack happens, Moscow will say that they have nothing to do with it, and that in fact it was an attack by Ukrainian drones, only disguised as Russian ones. And the NATO member countries do not want to impose responsibility on Ukraine, which they help so as not to be made a fool of. The well-known Russian provocative peacefulness. Moreover, the position of the Western countries themselves can also contribute to this peacefulness. More recently, the President of the United States, Donald Trump, said that the attack of Russian drones on Polish airspace was a mistake and could be due to the fact that the course of these drones could be changed by Ukrainian efforts. Now NATO is expressing doubts that the overflight of Russian fighters in Estonian airspace was deliberate. And they also talk about a possible pilot error. Well, it would seem that Putin did everything possible so that this flight was not considered a mistake. He sent 3 fighters capable of carrying a Dagger missile into the Estonian airspace in the direction of Tallinn, the capital of this country. But, as we see, in this case, it is much more pleasant to think that Russia acted by mistake, and did not intend to violate the airspace of history, but only got lost in a narrow corridor, than to admit that we are talking about a deliberate provocation in order to test the stability of the alliance. However, in Ukraine too, for quite a long time, the aggressive preparation of the Russian Federation for the outbreak of war against our country was perceived as a provocation to check vigilance or erroneous actions that were not coordinated with the Kremlin. Meanwhile, Vladimir Putin has already decided on a large-scale war that has been going on for 3.5 years, and has no potential to end. And it would seem NATO member countries should take into account this Ukrainian experience. But, as often happens on the eve of big wars, someone else's experience does not interest you when you do not want to look up and understand what danger you are actually dealing with. Thank you, friends. Stay on this channel, subscribe to it, subscribe to my social networks 4 channels in Patreon, BAME, Coffee, and Donatella, which helps to develop these resources. Use the sponsorship feature in YouTube itself. Global.